We are in Parshas Terumah this week, and Sefer Shmois changes tack. The rabbis describe three parts of the book of Exodus of Shmois: the servitude in Egypt, the exodus from Egypt, and the giving of the Torah. And that was, the giving of the Torah was 2 weeks ago, and then last week we came back at the end of the parsha, we discussed, we got all the laws of Mishpatim, of civil law, and then today we just switched tack completely, and the last 5 parshas, Terumah, Tetzaveh, Kisisa, Ve'akel, Pekudei, are all about the Mishkan, the tabernacle built in the desert, except for some part of Kisisa, which is the golden calf, which many ascribe the Mishkan and the golden calf as having a connection. Because of the sin of the golden calf, we needed to build a Mishkan. Hashem's presence needed to rest in us in a different way. So the rest of the book of Exodus is all about the Mishkan, essentially. And so we introduced in Terumah to all the vessels, or almost all the vessels in the Mishkan, and we'll come back to that in a moment. And then we go, the vessels and also the structure of the Mishkan itself. Then in Tetzaveh we discuss mainly the garments of the Kohanim, the priests, what they wore, the high priest and the regular priests. And that Tetzaveh ends with the golden Mizbeach, which we will come back to. Then we have Parshas Kisisa, which talks about the census that was taken. And in fact, last Shabbos was called Parshas Shkalim. We didn't discuss it last week. It's one of 4 special Shabboses between this period from just before Rosh Chodesh Adar until Pesach. We have 4 special parshas that are given a specific name, where we read a separate additional maftir reading. And so Parshas Shkalim is where we give a half shekel. It was given this every year around Rosh Chodesh Adar, which is tomorrow and Wednesday. And so we read it just before Rosh Chodesh or on Rosh Chodesh Adar if it falls out on a Shabbos. And that describes how each person would give a half shekel coin to the temple every year. Didn't matter if a person was rich or poor, they gave the same amount, and that was really for upkeep of the temple and maintenance around that. So Kisisa starts with that. It discusses the kior, the washing vessel that was used for the Kohanim to wash their hands and feet. And in fact, we wash our hands for bread as a reminder, besides for the, let's call it the health, hygienic aspect of it, of washing our hands. We were always the people who were clean. And the focus was we washed our hands. We wash our hands now in many ways as a reminder for what the Kohanim did. In order to do the service, they needed to wash their hands and feet. And so in order to eat, our table is like the shulchan, is like the mizbeach in the temple, and therefore we wash our hands before we eat bread. It speaks about the incense that was brought, what it's made of. It discusses the designation of the 2 main players in building the Mishkan, Betzalel and Ohelav. It talks about the Shabbos, Kisisa, and Moshe receiving the tablets, and then the whole episode with the golden calf and how Hashem forgives us. And Moshe comes down on Yom Kippur telling the people that they've been forgiven. And Moshe, obviously Moshe smashed the tablets the first time, comes down the second time with on Yom Kippur with the second tablets. And then Moshe, we're told, is what he's like. He's got extreme prophecy, and he's radiant. And interestingly enough, the Torah there, and we'll maybe discuss that in a couple of weeks' time or 3 weeks' time when we get to Kisisa, the Torah describes Moshe as having a radiance from his head. And certain people, when they understand the Hebrew language, or they don't understand the Hebrew language, the word Keren means horns, and Karan means light, radiance, and therefore Moses is depicted by Michelangelo with horns, and Christian theory comes along with that because they've got the word wrong. They just got the vowels wrong on the word. The word is radiance. His face shone. It was illuminated. He had to cover it with a mask. But we can come back to that in a few weeks' time. And then Vayakel starts with Shabbos, but it goes through all the contributions and the actual construction of the Mishkan itself. And the connection between Shabbos and the Mishkan, where it's brought in the Torah, is where we learn out the 39 prohibitions of Shabbos. The things that we're not allowed to do on Shabbos, the 39 main things we're not allowed to do, come from what was done in building the Mishkan. And then finally, Pekudei is the counting, and what actually went into the Mishkan. Everything that was donated was accounted for. Moshe accounted for every single item, all the materials used in the Mishkan, the setting up of the Mishkan, and Hashem's presence coming into the Mishkan and resting in that. And that's really, I'm just looking at the Art Scroll Chumash, it's from page 444 to 541, almost 100 pages in here. The next 5 parshas is really about the Mishkan. So we can stop there. But then we need to get into the detail. And this week's parsha goes into, as I said, almost every vessel, the walls, the covers of the Mishkan. So what was the Mishkan? The Mishkan was the tabernacle. It traveled with us through the desert. And so what I want to do is very quickly go through the parsha, what was in the Mishkan, and then discuss the history of the Mishkan becoming the Beis Hamikdash, becoming the temple, the first temple, the second temple, and what was that all about? What was that process? What was God's presence? What did it mean to have the Shekhinah rest with us? So the parsha is called Terumah. Terumah meaning a gift. In biblical times, Terumah was one of the gifts given to the Kohen. We talk about challah. Today we still take challah. We don't give it to a Kohen because we're not spiritually pure, and therefore we can't eat challah. But we still take challah as a mitzvah. We have to destroy it. That part we take. What we call challah, the bread we eat on Shabbos, called challah, is called that, another reminder of what happens in temple times, because the challah is actually the bread given to the Kohen. And only Kohanim can eat it. It is Terumah, it is a gift given to the Kohen. Regular produce that we have in the field, and we're learning at the moment Mishnah Terumah, so I'm teaching that in the mornings, and that Mishnah describes what it gets given to a Kohen, and essentially there's no fixed amount. It's around about 2% is the norm of produce that a farmer would produce, gets given to a Kohen and his family can eat that. Other people can't, and it can only be eaten in purity. The Kohen has to be ritually pure to eat it. And the next 10% is given to a Levi, he gives some to a Kohen, and there's various other things. And so I've done a whole chart, I worked out. A farmer initially has to take bikurim, first fruits, then has to leave things for the poor, leket, shich, and paya, various different things for the poor, small amounts. And then, if he's just, say, got 100 kilograms left of produce after that, so he's given away a small amount, he then, with that 100 kilos he's got, he gets approximately about 80 kilos for himself. About 20 kilos gets given away to the Kohen, to the Levi. He takes about 10 kilos for himself, which he has to eat in Yerushalayim, or redeem it and take the money to buy food in Yerushalayim. In most years, in 2 of the 6 years of every 7-year cycle, that 10% goes to poor people. But he lands up with 80% of the produce himself, about 20% is given to other people by force of Torah law.
Is that still practiced today?
No, because we can't, well, let me say it differently. Yes, but no. So yes, we do have to take Trumas and Maasros. There's a procedure to do it from fruit and vegetables in Israel. We don't do it, it's not out of Israel. And so there is a process that people would go through. So somebody's got a lemon tree in their backyard. When they take lemons off the lemon tree, they take them inside their house. They're obligated to take Truma and Maisa, a small amount, and redeem it onto a coin. So we can't give it to the Kohen and the Levi. We certainly can't give it to a Kohen because we're not ritually pure, and we don't know exactly who is a valid Kohen anymore. But the other parts of it we do take and give, and there's other gifts to Kohanim that are done. There's various things that are done to satisfy these mitzvahs, but they're not done in the full sense that they would be done in temple times. When we need the paraduma, one of the 4 special Shabbos that we're going to have is Shabbos Parshas Para, where we read about the paraduma. We need a red heifer in order to purify ourselves from the dead. And so we can't do that at the moment either. So all of these things are absolute Torah law. We keep what we can, and we have ways of doing it in our times without the temple. But this week's Parsha really is the Terumah spoken about in this week's Parsha, is the gifts that people gave to the towards the building of the Mishkan. So Moshe comes down, Hashem speaks to Moshe, it says, speak to the children of Israel, let them bring a portion, every man whose heart motivates him. If a person is motivated to give, they will give. So there's no, we spoke about at the beginning, Parshas Kisisa in a few weeks' time, where we gave half a shekel, that was a fixed amount. This is, if you've got and your heart motivates you, you will give. And those who are motivated give. And they were told to give. What portion were they told to give? Gold, silver, copper, turquoise, purple, scarlet wool, linen, goat's hair, red-dyed ram skins, something called tachash skins. Some people identify tachash as the unicorn, a single-horned, multicolored animal. Acacia wood, which is a very special wood, oil for illumination, spices for anointment oil, aromatic incense, shoham stones, stones for the settings, the ephod and the breastplate. These were the precious stones that were put on the breastplate and the shoulders of the Kohen Gadol in next week's Parsha. And all of these things, Hashem tells Moshe, tell the people to bring this. And they brought, and all this stuff was brought in a very, very quick time. And I want to go through the timeline afterwards, just exactly how the construction of the Mishkan happened. Then one of the most famous psukim in terms of the Mishkan, if not the most famous pasuk, maybe even in the whole Torah, the way we describe it, is V'asu li mikdash v'shachanti b'soicham. They shall make for me a sanctuary, a mikdash. It doesn't call it a Mishkan, it calls it a mikdash, which we call the temple, the Beis Hamikdash. But Hashem says, they shall make for me a sanctuary, v'shachanti b'soicham, and I will dwell in them, amongst them, not in it. Hashem doesn't say He will dwell in the sanctuary. He will dwell in them, in the people who make Hashem a sanctuary. And depending on time, we might discuss what that actually means and how we interpret it. But essentially what that means is we have in our times, and certainly since the destruction of the Second Temple nearly 2,000 years ago, what we call a mikdash ma'at, a small mikdash. Our shuls, our schools, our base medrash where we learn, and our homes. That's where Hashem's presence dwells. We need to create an environment where Hashem is comfortable dwelling in our homes. How do we behave in our house? Is Hashem comfortable walking into the door? Do I have a valid mezuzah on my doorposts? Do I have a standard of kashrus in my house that Hashem would be happy to eat in my house, so to speak? Do I not speak on the phone or speak to people in my house, scream and shout or gossip? Everything I do, we should be thinking, would Hashem be able to sit comfortably next to me and be happy with me? And we can put it into our own terms. Would the Gadol Hador, the biggest rabbi in our time, be happy to walk into my home on a tiny little scale? Now magnify that to Hashem. We can't. It's almost impossible, but that's really what the goal of that verse is. Hashem says, make your home, your shuls, a sanctuary to me, and that's one of the things that really upsets a lot of people, myself especially, talking in shul. Because Hashem will not be happy if we sit talking in shul. And another time is, for example, they say, Hashem comes to visit every Pesach Seder. And if we're sitting in the Pesach Seder during the meal and gossiping and schmoozing and chatting about, the football, or other people, will Hashem be comfortable coming to my Pesach Seder? No, during the meal, let's talk about Pesach. That's what it's about. And so we just need to take a small little step back and say, am I doing something that Hashem would be proud of me? Would He want to sit next to me? Would He want to put His presence into my home, into my life? Then I'm connected to Hashem. That's what the Mishkan was about. Once the Mishkan was built in Parsha in a few weeks' time, right at the end of the book of Exodus of Shmois, Hashem's presence came down and rested. His Shechina, Hashem's presence, rested between the Kruvim on top of the ark, which is what we're going to learn about shortly. But Hashem kissed the world, so to speak, at that point. His spiritual presence came down and connected to us physically, which is why Yerushalayim is the center of Hashem, of Torah, of understanding, of connection to Hashem, because there is still some form of Hashem's presence there, which we will discuss after we've run through the Parsha. Okay, the first vessel spoken about is the Aron, the ark. So, V'asu Aron Atze, Shittim, make for me an ark of acacia wood, and make it 2.5 amas. An amah is about, let's call it a half a meter. For want of a better term, it's the length from the elbow to the end of the finger. About a half a meter. So make it 2.5 meters, 1.5 meters its width, and 1.5 meters its height. It's not very big. And cover that wooden box with gold on the inside and the outside. So it's a triple layered wood and golden box. Put 4 rings on the side, on the 4 corners, and you put poles through the rings, make these staves with acacia wood and cover them with gold. And that's so it can be carried. Now, interesting enough, the ark wasn't carried. The ark carried those that were carrying it, so to speak. It was extremely heavy. Imagine a box of wood, gold, 2.5 by 1.5 meters, containing the luchos, which were made of stone, probably sapphire in our understanding, and they were extremely heavy, the tablets that Moshe brought down. It also contained, according to most opinions, the broken tablets. So Moshe came down after the golden calf and broke the tablets, after the letters went up, and then he carved new ones, and Hashem wrote on those, engraved on those, the Seres HaDibros, and then both of those were in there, and there are also opinions that says that Sefer Torah, Moshe wrote the actual Sefer Torah on the last day of his life, as well as 12 others, one for each of the tribes. That original Sefer Torah was either in the ark or just next to it. There was also a jar of man, and one jar of man was kept for all time, as well as Aaron's staff, his stick. All of that was in or around the Aaron. And so it carried people. On top of the Aaron, there was a lid, which had 2 kruvim. Kruvim being cherubs in English. They're described as angelic young children-looking things with wings over the top of it. And through that is how Hashem's presence rested into the Jewish people.
And how many carried this?
None. It carried itself. One of the tribes was designated when they were moving. One of the groups of the Levium were designated to carry it. But what does it mean it carried it? They could not pick it up physically. It was too heavy. So they would work with it. And there's a story which we might come to of what happened with the ark in the time between coming to Israel and the building of the first temple, and how it was actually stolen by the Pelishtim. And so how that all happened is hard to understand because it was so heavy. But again, it carried itself. The next item spoken about is the shulchan, the table. The table was there. I'll come back to where each of these things were placed, but the table was the ark was in the Holy of Holies, the Kodesh Kadoshim. The area before that was called the Kodesh, the Holy. So the shulchan was there with a couple of other things. The shulchan was there with what we call the lechem hapanim, the showbreads. There were 12 loaves of bread baked every week. They were baked on a Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday, depending. If it was Yom Tov, and we're talking now in temple times where we had 2 days Rosh Hashanah. If Rosh Hashanah was Thursday, Friday, then they baked it on Wednesday. If Yom Tov was on Friday, then they baked it on Thursday, and a regular week they baked it on Friday. It was then swapped out on a Shabbos. The 12 loaves were taken out and the 12 new loaves replaced. So it was like a bit of a conveyor belt type system. They were stacked in 2 stacks of 6 loaves. And the Kohanim ate those 12 loaves every Shabbos. The miracle of the table, of the breads on the table, was that they were steaming hot, even 9 or 10 days later when they were eaten. So the ones that they took out that may have been baked a week and a half before were still as if they'd just come out the oven. And on Yom Tov, on the Shalosh Regalim, when all the Jewish people came to Yerushalayim, the temple times, the Kohanim would take the shulchan and lift it up and take it and show the people, because it was inside, in the temple, it was inside the building, so you couldn't see in. It was sitting on the side, so they'd pick it up and show it to the people, and they could see the steam coming off the bread in there, just to show one of the miracles thing, which we would maybe discuss the 10 miracles.
Sorry, what about for Shabbos? They had double. So they
No, this is separate. This is special bread in the Mishkan. It's not regular bread. This is just shared. No. This is just special bread in one of the services of the Mishkan was to have lechem hapanim, the showbread. The next item was the menorah, also in the Kodesh, in the Holy. The description of the menorah is extremely, extremely difficult to understand. Daf Yomi we just learned it in Daf Yomi and Gemara in the last week, what the menorah was like. And it was one of those things that Moshe Rabbeinu could not understand how you can build it. Physically, to build a golden 7-branch candelabra with flowers and knobs and decorative cups on each of the branches, gold can't stand up. The arms would be too heavy. So there is a depiction by Rambam, and many people hold that the menorah was straight, like angled 6 poles with one in the middle. The one we see mostly today is rounded, and that's, the state of Israel adopted that as its national symbol, and that's become the symbol. The menorah on the Ark of Titus in Rome, on the Arch of Titus, that's showing a Jewish slave carrying a menorah that may not have been the actual menorah from the temple, because if it was pure gold and it stood relatively high, it would be impossible to carry it. There were, in this first temple, Shlomo HaMelech put in 10 extra menorahs for light. And so what menorah is actually there, but that is rounded, the one on the Arch of Titus, Harosha. But this was very difficult. Moshe couldn't understand it. It's one of those things that Hashem showed Moshe in fire, how to build it. And it was made from a single massive piece of gold. Where they got that from, how it all happened, we don't know. There is, if you go to Yerushalayim in the Old City, in the Rova, in the square in the Old City now, outside the Churva Shul, is a very large menorah, the size of this menorah, what it was like. The point of that is gold, but it does have alloy in it. Because otherwise gold would be too soft and heavy and it will just fall down eventually. So they've had to put alloy in, and the Gemara actually discusses whether you can and what you can and can't use for it, and they've based it on that Gemara and built or created a menorah that can be used. It's a 7-branch menorah, and we're not allowed to build a replica of that. So Hanukkah we have 8 plus 1, but we're not supposed to build a menorah like that, because that menorah was the menorah in the Beis Hamikdash, in the Mishkan, in the temple, and therefore we don't build it. But it was extremely complicated. It was lit. There was one of the miracles of the menorah was that one of the lights never went out. The Western lights stayed lit all the time. They cleared it out every morning. They cleaned it. They relit it in the afternoon, and the one light was always a light. Then the Parsha talks about the actual covers over the tabernacle, over the Mishkan itself. The Mishkan had a courtyard, and then the actual building in the middle, which was really wooden walls with various different coverings over the top, and goes at length describing the curtains, what they were made from, all the different materials that I spoke about at the beginning, different types of wool, linen, and skins, all weaved together and covered over. So you had this building that could be, I guess, folded up and carried from place to place. So through the journeys in the desert, that building was able to be closed down, folded, packed up on wagons, and moved. And so we've got all the different covers explained in extreme detail. Then it describes the walls of the Mishkan, how each wall was built, how tall they were, how they were held together with sockets at the bottom going into, or tenons in the bottom of each wooden pole going into sockets underneath it so it was stable. There was also poles going around the Mishkan, keeping it together, including a middle beam, which went through, there was a hole drilled through each of these upright beams. Now, picture a U. That's probably the easiest shape to think about, without rounded corners or squared corners. And this middle beam went down the one side, took a right angle turn through the middle part, took another right angle turn and back up the other side. Internally within the walls. Physically impossible, because you got one long piece of wood going through like this. One of the miracles had happened in the Mishkan. Physically impossible to build it, because this is the point where physicality and spirituality connect. Hashem kisses us at this point. There was a partition, a paroiches, in front, blocking off between the different parts. And then the Torah ends talking about the altar, the actual mizbeach where they brought the sacrifices. In Mishkan times, it was made from copper. It was a copper box, hollowed, and they put soil into it. In the temple times, when they built the temple, it was then made of stone. And it was a square copper box, and they'd bring the sacrifices of the fire on top of that would be brought on top of that box, all the animal sacrifices. And then finally it talks about the courtyard around the outside. So you've got a courtyard. Within that courtyard, just outside the Mishkan structure, you've got the copper mizbach, the altar, and then inside you've got the holy, and in the holy we've discussed the table, the shulchan, and the menorah, the candelabra. And there was also a golden mizbach, which is in next week's parsha. At the end of next week's parsha discusses the small golden mizbach, where they brought incense on that. So you had those three vessels in the Kodesh, in the holy, and then behind a curtain in the Holy of Holies, the Kodesh Kadoshim, you had the Aron. That was really the structure of the Mishkan, and it was a building that lasted for, in itself, just over the 40-year period that they were in the desert. It then was moved and became Mishkan Shiloh in the place called Shiloh, and they found a lot of evidence there they found bones around the town of Shiloh. They firstly found a wall surrounding where the Mishkan would have been, and many, many bones, particularly of lamb and goat, kid goats, which would have been the Pesach sacrifices, because that's the biggest, the largest amount of offerings brought would be on Pesach, because every single group, family, would be bringing in their own Korban Pesach. And so they have found many, many bones around Mishkan Shiloh within the walls, because the halacha is when you go to Yerushalayim, you have to eat the Korban Pesach in Yerushalayim. And so in Mishkan Shiloh, you had to eat it around Mishkan Shiloh itself. And so they've discovered exactly what was there. The Mishkan stayed in Shiloh for 369 years. I'm just looking for my timeline that I did. I can't see it here, right? Here we go, Beis Hamikdash. So the Mishkan was built in the wilderness soon after Moshe came down. So Moshe came down finally after his third trip up and down to be with Hashem al Sinai. The first 40 days was getting the Torah. Then he came down the golden calf. He went back up again and asked Hashem for forgiveness. Hashem said, fine, go down on the 17th of Tammuz, carve out a second set of luchos and come back up again. He went up and came down on Yom Kippur with a second set. He then gave the instructions in this week's Parsha of what to do. Between this week's Parsha, Yom Kippur, the 10th of Tishrei, and the 25th of Kislev, which is Chanukah. So we're talking about, in secular dates, let's call it mid-September to late December. In that period of time, this entire Mishkan was built. Betzalel, who was in charge of building of the Mishkan, we're told that in a couple of weeks' time, was 13 years old. These people had come out of Egypt as slaves. None of them were skilled craftsmen, and they were building the most intricate pieces of jewelry, effectively, for next week's Parsha, for what the Kohanim wore, certainly Kohen Gadol, as well as massive building projects to build a very large structure, which had to be temporary, so it could be put up and put down, so it had to be strong enough to be moving all the time, led by a 13-year-old. And they were given, Hashem gave them special insight. Those that gave were given insight in how to do this. And they were not skilled craftsmen at this point in time, but they became very, very skilled very quickly. So it was built and ready to be set up on the 25th of Kislev, bin Chanukah. There's a connection there. And then it was only put up on the 1st of Nisan, which would be a month from now, the end of March, early April, thereabouts. And so in that period, they were getting ready for it, then it was inaugurated. It stayed with them as the Mishkan in the wilderness for the next 38 years, after the sin of the spies, where they were punished to have to stay in the desert for 40 years. It stayed with them for 40 years. Most of the time in the desert, they were not moving. It was 19 years in one place. Sometimes they moved every day. Most of the time they were reasonably established in one place. Then when Joshua took them into Eretz Israel, Eretz Canaan at the time, through the conquest, it was then put into what we called, it was discussed, Mishkan Shiloh. Mishkan Shiloh was 369 years, and that was a stone building with the same covers on top. So it was more permanent. It was then relocated to two places, Noiv and Givon, by the Kohanim. Shiloh was attacked by the Pelishtim, the ark was stolen, and they moved the structure for the next number of years, it's about 60 or 70 years from memory, to Noiv and Givon in two different places. And they still used the Mishkan as a temporary structure in those places. And then finally, King David acquired Yerushalayim from the Jebusites and wanted to build the temple. Hashem said, no, you can't, because King David was a warrior, he had blood on his hands, and temple is a place of peace. And his son Shlomo meaning, from the word shalom, meaning peace, was allowed to build a temple. But it was based on the plans that David drew up, and King David was ready to build it in Yerushalayim. Shlomo had to build it. The Torah never talks about Yerushalayim. The Torah tells us many times this will happen in the place that I will show you, Hashem says. In the place, and the place he shows us is Yerushalayim. The temple itself, according to our tradition, is built on the foundation stone of the world. The stone, the Even Shasiyah, it's called, that Hashem created the world from, that Adam Arishan came from, the very first people came from there. That stone is the centerpiece of the world. And the Aaron, the ark, sat on that stone. It was recovered. The Pelishtim returned it. They had a whole lot of problems because of the ark. It's all discussed in the Tanakh. And they returned it. There was a whole parade, and King David, somebody touched the Aaron, and he died because of that. As I said, it carries you. It looked like it was going to fall off the wagon. He tried to grab it, and Uzzah touched it, and he was killed. Hashem said, no, you're not allowed to touch it. The ark can hold itself up. And King David then brought the ark back to Yerushalayim in a massive parade. And his wife was not happy with him as the king dancing around like he did. And he said, no. When we dance for Hashem, we need to show Hashem proper joy. There was such an incredible procedure to bring it back. It was then put, as I said, on the Even Shasiyah in the first temple. The first temple was built by Shlomo HaMelech. As part of the temple complex, which we're discovering now in our times, he built a whole labyrinth of tunnels under the temple. And that's what we're discovering on Temple Mount right now when we went on a tour of walking through the temple tunnels. Before the destruction of the first temple by Nebuchadnezzar, Babylonian king, the ark was hidden. According to our tradition, the ark was hidden, and there's that movie, Raiders of the Lost Ark. That's kind of what it's about. It's about trying to find the ark under the Temple Mount, as far as I recall. But it was hidden away, and still to this day, it is somewhere in the tunnels, in some concealed room. When the third temple is built, it will be revealed. The original Aaron built in the desert times of Moshe. So the first temple was destroyed in the year 3338, which is 422 or thereabouts BCE, before the Common Era. We then went into exile in Babylon and we landed up in Persia eventually. And the story of Esther and Mordechai and the Megillah happens. Purim is in 2 weeks' time. And afterwards, after that, essentially King Esther's son, according to certain Midrashic sources in the Gemara, allowed the building of the temple. Zerubbabel and Ezra Sofer went back. Very few Jewish people went back. So tens of thousands, about 40,000 odd people went back, rebuilt the second temple. The second temple didn't have the same holiness as the first temple. It was a much smaller structure, far more modest than the first temple. And the first temple was stood for 410 years. There was a 70-year gap between them, based on prophecies. The second temple stood for 420 years. Included in that is the Hanukkah miracle. And then towards the end of the second temple period, there was a slave who became a king, Herod. And Herod modified the temple, extended the Temple Mount. Where we have the Western Wall today, that Western Wall is what we can see, the big part of the wall, is really the outer retaining wall of Herod's temple, Herod's extension of the Temple Mount. So it doesn't have the same holiness as the Temple Mount itself. What, according to most opinions, where the Golden Dome is sitting on top of Temple Mount is the holiest place on earth, which is why, according to rabbinic tradition, we are not allowed to go there because we're not ritually pure. In order to go up to the temple, you had to be completely ritually pure. And we, as I said before, we don't have the red heifer, so we can't go up there. But there are people who do go up, but they don't go into that area. Jewish people are not allowed around that area. We don't know exactly where the temple stood in terms of its precise location. According to most opinions, the dome of the rock, as it's called, that rock is the Evan Shasia, the foundation stone of the world. And so we certainly do not go there. There are major potential punishments for us to go there if we're not ritually pure. But Herod increased it. You can go today, we've discovered, certainly in the underground tunnels, parts of the Kotel of the Western Wall that are still extant, as well as in the Arab market, there's what's called the Kotel HaKatan, the small Kotel, which is right opposite the Holy of Holies, as close as we can legally as Jews go, and I'm using the word legally in terms of halachic legally, as we can go. We can go up onto the steps by one of the gates and you can get close, but you can't, not to the top step. Plus, the police are standing there and you look close to being Jewish, they won't let you up. I did see something phenomenal the other day. There are a lot of people that do go up, and they go up and they know where to go or where they can't go. But what has happened in the last few months is they've started praying again. In 1967, we took the whole of Jerusalem in the Six-Day War. Through a various range of political and rabbinic discussions, they decided to give the Temple Mount back to the Waqf, the Jordanian authority. Until now, Jewish people were only allowed to go up very irregularly. You had to book an appointment and the whole big thing, and people would go to the mikveh and then go up. And you were only allowed to walk around, no davening, no anything. Recently, it's been relaxed and people have started praying, and you can see videos online, people actually prostrating, bowing down completely on the Temple Mount. And what has been reported anecdotally is as more and more people are doing this and going up, fewer and fewer Muslims are actually going up onto Temple Mount to pray there. It's like an inverse relationship, it seemed like. So we're waiting for the day when we can go up there properly and have proper purity and be able to be there fully. The second temple was then destroyed. So Herod was in late 1st century BCE. He beautified the temple. And in fact, if you look at the Kotel, if you look at the Western Wall, towards the bottom of it, there are a number of stones with like a border around them, a frame. That is a Herodian. Herod put those stones in place. As you go higher up, the stones are much newer. And as you go lower down, the stones are much older and much bigger. And First Temple stones are these. How they moved them is incredible. An incredible engineering feat 3,500 years ago. The temple was then destroyed in the year 70, according to our tradition. Some people hold 67, but 70 of the Common Era, almost 2,000 years ago, by the Romans. They dismantled the temple, they plowed over Jerusalem, changed it to Anna Capitoline, and we have been exiled since that point in time. However, there's always been Jews there. There's never been a time where there were no Jews in Israel, in Jerusalem. Small numbers through most of the last 2,000 years, certainly until 1700s, and then we started going back again. But there's always been a Jewish presence in the land. And so that, as we said, Hashem's presence rested in the world. He came down, his Shekhinah came down, however we understand this, and rested between the Kruvim on top of the Aron, between these cherubs on top of the ark. And there were constant miracles in the Mishkan and the temple. The Mishnah in Pirkei Avos talks about 10 miracles. So in the 5th chapter of Pirkei Avos, of Ethics of the Fathers, it discusses tens. We've discussed a number of these a few times. It starts off by Esem Amaros Nivra Olam, the world was created with 10 utterances. Hashem said if you look at the creation of the world, Hashem said 10 different things, actually said 9 things, and we learn out that the word Bereshis in the beginning of God's creating heaven and earth is the first of the 10. 10 things Hashem said, and the world was created through the word of Hashem. That parallels to the 10 plagues and the Seres Adibros and many other 10s. Then it discusses 10 generations from Adam HaRishon until Noach, 10 generations from Noach till Avraham. Avraham had 10 trials, which we discussed a few months ago, most of those. 10 miracles were performed for our ancestors in Egypt, and 10 at the sea, and Hashem put 10 plagues on the Egyptians. Then it says our ancestors tested Hashem 10 times in the Midbar. We gave Hashem a very difficult time, and Moshe Rabbeinu a very difficult time in the desert. And then I'll leave out the next Mishnah number 7. I'll come back to it in a moment. Then says there were 10 things were created, Bein Hashmashos, at twilight on Erev Shabbos. Certain things were created by Hashem right at the last moment. We're going to learn about the mouth of the earth that swallowed up Korach and his friends and family. The mouth of the well of Miriam, the water that we had in the desert. The mouth of the donkey, Bilam's donkey. The rainbow, which was Noach's sign. The man, which we learned about a few weeks ago. The staff that I just spoke about earlier. Those two things were included in the in or next to the Aron because they were from time of creation, essentially. Hashem put them into creation. The next one talks about is the Shamir worm. The Shamir worm, in order to build the temple, I said King David wasn't allowed to build the temple because he was a man of warfare. We weren't allowed to cut stones with metal implements to make the temple. And so there was a special mystical worm called the Shamir worm, which they were able to use to cut the stones for them. Both the engraving on the stones that they were put onto the breastplate and the shoulders of the Kohen Gadol, as well as in the temple time, Shlomo HaMelech found the Shamir worm and they used it to cut the stones used for temple. The script, the inscription on the tablets, and then some say also the Mazikin, the destructive angel spirits, for another time, what those were. Moshe's grave, because we don't know where Moshe was buried. The ram that came when Abraham went to take Yitzchak on the Akedah, and some also say tongs, pliers, tongs, because you can't, if you think about a blacksmith can only make a set of pliers or tongs with another set of tongs. You need something to hold it with. And so that's the 10 things, which are not 10 things, it's a few more. And then it goes into number 7, a whole lot of 7s, and then a whole number of 4s. Now, the one that I've missed out is Mishnah Zion, Mishnah 7, says, Asara Nisim Nasu Lavasenu Beis Hamikdash. There were 10 miracles that our forefathers, our ancestors had in the temple. And I'll just read through these in English. No women miscarried because of the aroma of the sacrificial meat. The smell of the meat gave women such amount of joy that there was no issue of miscarrying there. It was one of the miracles. The meat never went off. It never became putrid. Now remember that the temple in many ways was a slaughterhouse, an outdoor slaughterhouse. But the sun in Yerushalayim in summer, it's pretty hot. You get that chamsin that comes in, it's very warm. And they slaughtered, and the meat was hung up, and then some of it was offered up, and most of the sacrifices were eaten. There was no refrigeration. They had to be eaten in 1 or 2 days generally. But in that time, no meat ever went off. It was always fully fresh. There was no fly ever seen in the place where they where the animals were slaughtered and the meat was butchered. Now it's an outside. Remember, it's an outside area. It's hot. It's summer. You just need to walk out in Melbourne in daylight today, and you'll be inundated with flies. Yeah. Never mind if you left a piece of meat out there. No high priest. The Kohen Gadol was the Mishnah in Yomai, describing Yom Kippur, describes how the Kohen Gadol was taken for 7 days and trained and brought in the temple between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Essentially, was trained. Now, if he had a seminal emission, he was not able to do the service, and there was a miracle that never ever happened in that time period to a Kohen Gadol. The Mizbeach, the outer Mizbeach, where the sacrifices were burnt, was outside. But rain never put out the fire. There was a permanent fire there. It could have rained. We had rain in Yerushalayim the one day, huge amounts of rain when we were there now. And the rain never put out the fire on Mizbeach itself. The flames or the smoke of the sacrifices went straight up. Didn't matter how much wind there was, the smoke always, there was a straight column of smoke straight up from the altar. The Omer, which is the offering brought on second day Pesach, which allows us to eat new grain. Once they brought the Omer offering, they could eat new grain from that season. We don't have the Omer offering today, so from that point in time, we can eat new grain. There was never found to be a problem with the Omer offering. On Shavuot, there was a special offering bringing 2 animals and 2 loaves. Those 2 loaves, as well as there was a sacrifice that a person brought called the Korban Toida, a Thanksgiving offering. If somebody had gone through a difficult situation, certain circumstances, we today bench Gomel, we say the Gomel prayer for the same kinds of things, but somebody who had let out of jail or crossed the ocean or crossed the desert or had recovered from a serious illness would bring a Korban Toida. The Korban Toida was an animal, as well as 40 loaves of bread, and had to be eaten in one day and one night. Now you try and eat 40 loaves. So therefore you would have a Thanksgiving party. And you'd invite all your friends, and those 40 loaves would be eaten, and the animal. Beautiful shawarmas. 10 of those loaves, as well as these 2 loaves on Shavuot, were the only chometz brought in the temple. The rest of it was all matzah. Now, not matzah like we have matzahs in hard cardboard style matzah. It was various different types of what we call mincha offerings. Menachos were brought, different types of bread, but it was all not chometz. It was a chometz-free zone except for these 2 types of offerings. And so there was never disqualification in those 2 loaves on Shavuot or in the 12 loaves of showbread brought every single week. They were always perfect. The next one's incredible miracles. When people stood crowded together, it was completely chaotic. We had millions of people potentially in a very small area. And they stood crowded together. However, when everybody bowed down, as soon as they bowed down, there was just ample space. You just had, nobody could come in, you couldn't feel anybody. It was one of the miracles that it just expanded and contracted spiritually, but came out physically. There was neither a snake or serpent nor scorpion ever caused an injury in Yerushalayim. Because Yerushalayim was so holy, no person ever got bitten by a snake or stung by a scorpion. And nobody ever said there's not enough space in Yerushalayim to stay overnight. There was always space for people. Everybody had extra rooms because that was the miracles of Yerushalayim. So the temple existed between the realm of physicality and spirituality. It was something that was beyond the physical, but it was physical. And that was the whole Mishkan. It was just a place where we could connect to Hashem. When the temple was destroyed, there's a Gemara that describes this. The Romans came to destroy the temple, and they sent troops from all 4 directions, north, south, east, and west. And each of the 3 going north, east, and south were able to destroy the walls outside the temple and get up to Temple Mount. The general coming from the western side, whatever he tried, could not destroy the western wall. And they came up with a plan. They said, you know what? We should leave this wall intact. Because if we leave the wall intact, then future generations will see how great we were, that we were able to destroy the building on top and everything else, but we left the wall as a legacy. It's actually a prophecy. The prophecy says the western wall, Hashem's presence will never leave the western wall. And so therefore, that's why it's the most holy place that we can go to today. It's not the most holy place on earth. The most holy place on earth is where Hashem's actual Shekhinah touches in the Holy of Holies, in the foundation stone, through the Aron. But Hashem said His presence will leave and go into exile with us. Hashem is in Galus with us. But some form of connection to Hashem's presence. Whatever this means, it's beyond our understanding. Just to know that that presence of Hashem, that connection to spirituality, is available to us. And that is why so many people are attracted to going, not only Jewish people, to Eretz Israel, because the holiness, the land of Israel, the Gemara says that Hashem gave the world 10 parts of holiness. Eretz Israel took 9 of them. The rest of the world has 1. We kind of, the rest of us, the whole world has got 10%. But Yerushalayim took most of it. It's all concentrated in Yerushalayim. It's all concentrated in the Temple Mount. In our times, it's concentrated in the Western Wall. And so there are many people, putting these notes into the wall. Lots of people won't put their fingers into the gaps in the wall, because where do we delineate? Where's Hashem's presence? We're not holy enough to go up in Temple Mount. Hashem's presence is somewhere in the wall. So there are people who will not put fingers into the wall because Hashem's presence extends to that point. It's just a sign of reverence. When we go to the Kotel, to the Western Wall, there's a special feeling there. I mean, the most incredible feeling is when you're standing there and you get these foreign tourists. And this trip we were there now was the first time in 2.5 years that there's actually been foreign tourists that we've experienced. But you're standing there and davening, and some guy comes up to you and takes a picture from you right next to you, in your face. It's like, but you just can't explain it. It's a place where you can feel holiness. Now, obviously, if we are not connected to that, it's like anything else. If you want to become a professional person's a good sportsman, but they want to become really good. Look at these pro tennis players. They practice 6 hours a day. They train, they exercise, they do, and every other sportsman for that. They have pre-season and they get into, and everything. It's just like this one continual practice. You want to become a good lawn bowler. You're not going to rock up on Wednesday afternoon to play pennant if you haven't practiced on Tuesday and Sunday kind of thing, because you're not going to be very good. And that's really what Kedusha is also about. It's about connecting to Hashem. So Hashem gave us all the different mitzvahs so that we can connect our holiness to Him. Hashem wants to rest His presence in our lives. Hashem wants to rest with us. But we need to come to the party. Hashem, as I said at the beginning, one of the most famous verses in the whole Torah is Hashem says, I will create for me a mikdash and I will rest my presence in them. In them meaning within us. Hashem wants to be within us. But we need to come to the party first. We need to create an environment where Hashem can rest His presence in us. So we want to go to the Western Wall in our times. Please God, we want to go to the temple. It should be rebuilt soon. But we need to do something that Hashem says, yep, I'm comfortable coming to sit with you. So where do we do these things? By sitting and learning Torah. One of the ways is Hashem says, if a group of people are learning Torah, Hashem is sitting with us, feeding us the Torah. If 2 people are learning, and we learn generally in a yeshiva and a kollel, generally we learn 2 chavrusas with each other. It's a fun experience. I mean, because everybody wants to bring their own opinion. So you hear chavrusas screaming at each other. Hang on, you're wrong. That's not what this verse just said. And you hear, it's actually quite, in some Batei Midrash, there are people who literally scream at each other. We got one guy in the kollel here, he screams. But he'll walk out, so to speak, arm in arm with his chavrusa, after having told him that he's got no idea what he's talking about. They walk out arm in arm because it's all about connecting to Hashem. We're making Hashem feel like we are discussing Hashem's Torah. When we put food in our mouth, Hashem says this is the kind of food we eat. We should try and improve the way we eat. What we do, we say brachas. Everything we do, if we can make another little step, another step, then Hashem says, oh, you're trying to get better, you want to come closer to me, then I'll give you more opportunities to come closer to me and I will rest my presence on you. And you will realize that everything comes from Hashem. It's all, what came first, the chicken or the egg? What do you put first, the cart before the horse? All these expressions are connected to that. We need to make that first move. We make the move, do something for Hashem, improve ourselves, get a little bit better, then we'll start feeling Hashem's connection. We'll start feeling Hashem's presence. And we'll realize, and it's not, Hashem's presence is there. It's just that we are blocked because we've put so much Western nonsense into us. And it's not our fault. We were educated that way mostly. But we've got all these Western world things blocking us from connecting to Hashem. We need to strip back and say, well, what do the rabbis tell us that we should do? What does the Torah tell us we should do? We take that next step and another step, then Hashem will rest His presence, and we won't have just the small part of Hashem's presence of the Shekhinah that we cannot see right now. That little part in the Western Wall, we'll have the full gambit of Hashem's presence, the whole Shekhinah in Yerushalayim with the temple. May it be rebuilt soon.